Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath, Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatara Satashishmal His Divine Grace Abhay Chanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan Ki Jai Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande Hare Guru. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 8, The Manifestation of Brahma from Vishnu, text number 10. Udaplutam Vishwamidam Tadasit. Udaplutam Vishwam idam Tadasit. Yanidraya milita dhrinya milita milayat. Yanidraya milita dhrinya milayat. Ahindratalpe dishayana eka. Ahindratalpe disayana eka. Kritakshana svatmarato niriha. Kritakshana svatmarato niriha. Udaplutam vishvamidam tadasit. Yanidraya milita dhrinya milayat. Ahindratalpe dishayana ekaha. Kritakshana svatmarato niriha. Udaplutam vishvamidam tadasit. Yanidraya milita dhrinya milayat. Ahindratalpe disayana eka. Kritakshana svatmarato niriha. Word for word, Uda, water, Aplutam, submerged in, Visvam, the three worlds, Idam, this, Tada, at that time, Asit, it so remained, Yat, in which, Nidraya, in slumber, Amilita, closed, Drik, eyes, Nyamilayat, not completely closed, Ahi Indra, the great snake Ananta, Talpe, on the bed of, Adishayanaha, lying on, Ekaha, alone, Kritakshanaha, being engaged, Swa-atmarato, enjoying in his internal potency. Niriha, without any part of external energy. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charnaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So this is Maitreya continuing to speak to Vidura about what happens when the living entities are, or rather the partial dissolution, when the living entities merge into the body of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. At that time, when the three worlds were submerged in water, Garbhodakashayi Vishnu was alone, lying on his bedstead, the great snake Ananta, and although he appeared to be in slumber in his own internal potency, free from the action of the external energy, his eyes were not completely closed. Purport: the Lord is eternally enjoying a transcendental bliss by his internal potency, whereas the external potency is suspended during the time of the dissolution of the cosmic manifestation. We'll continue reading. Text number 11, translation. Just as the strength of fire within fuel... I'll read the Sanskrit. Sonanta sharire pita bhuta sukshma kalatmikam shakti mudharayana tuvasa tasmin salile padesved yaton nalodharani ruddha virya. Translation: just like the strength of fire within fuel wood, the Lord remained within the water of dissolution, submerging all living entities in their subtle bodies. He lay in the self-invigorated energy called Kala. Purport: after the three worlds, the upper, lower and middle planetary systems, merged into the water of dissolution, the living entities of all the three worlds remained in their subtle bodies by dint of the energy called Kala. In this dissolution, the gross bodies became unmanifest, but the subtle bodies existed, just like the water of the material creation. Thus, the material energy was not completely wound up, as is the case in the full dissolution of the material world. I'll read one more. Text 12. Chaturyuganam cha sahasram apsu swapnam swayo diritaya swasaktya kalakyaya sadita karma tantro Lokan apitan dadrishe swadehe. Translation for text 12. The Lord lay down for 4,000 yuga cycles in his internal potency, and by his external energy he appeared to be sleeping within the water. When the living entities were coming out for further development of their fruitive activities actuated by the energy called Kala Shakti, he saw his transcendental body as bluish. Purport: in the Vishnu Purana, Kala Shakti is mentioned as avidya. The symptom of the influence of the Kala Shakti is that one has to work in the material world for fruitive results. The fruitive workers are described in Bhagavad Gita as mudas, or foolish. Such foolish living entities are very enthusiastic to work for some temporary benefit within perpetual bondage. One thinks himself very clever throughout his life if he is able to leave behind him a great asset of wealth for his children, and to leave this temporary benefit and to achieve this temporary benefit, he takes the risk of all sinful activities, without knowledge that such activities will keep him perpetually bound by the shackles of material bondage. Due to this polluted mentality and due to material sins, the aggregate combination of living entities appeared to be bluish. Such an impetus of activity for fruitive result is made possible by the dictation of the external energy of the Lord, Kala. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadama Yam Dadati Swapadantikham Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitham Tham Sajivam Sahadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kantha Radha Kantha Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I think that's inside. It's coming from inside. So today we are now continuing, as is mentioned before, the description of the cosmic manifestation. We talked about Sarga previously, and now we're talking about Visarga, or the secondary creation done by the original engineer of this universe, Lord Brahma. Today we'll talk a bit about that, and also a bit about Srila Haridas Thakur. It's his appearance today, so we'll touch a bit about Srila Haridas Thakur's pastimes as well. So, what we left off with was Vidura asking Maitreya about the living entities and their relation, and the Supreme Lord and their relationship with this material energy, and how the living entities, although being freed or of a different nature, the spiritual nature, how is it that they are illusioned or come under control of Maya? And how is it that it appears that Krishna, he also does so? Because he doesn't need to act. Name karmanti limpanti. That Krishna does not need to act. There's no karma for Krishna to perform. But even though that's the case, sometimes he appears in the material world, just like as he does as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, Kshiradakashaya Vishnu, Karanadakashaya Vishnu, and performs some sort of action of creation, although it is already performed by his energies. But although such manifestation of such acts are there, and they appear to be of the same nature of the living entities' actions, they are not of the same quality, for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never affected by the material energy, neither by karma. So there's no reaction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada says in the purport previously that this is the prerogative of the Lord, that he can appear, he can do whatever he likes, and he can leave without any trace of reaction on himself. Just like a king enters a prison and is not affected by the prison. And just as the king is unaffected by his own laws, that he can choose, the king can choose to liberate a prisoner based on their good habits, despite them having such a long sentence. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is able to perform activities and not be affected by the results. But still the Lord comes and descends into the material world and performs the activities to set an example. So we previously talked about that. But now we're talking about how the living entities, after dissolution of the material world, as we know that when Lord Brahma, he goes to sleep, then the waters of the cosmic manifestation, the Garbha Daka, the Garbha ocean, it rises up, Garbha Udaka. It rises up from the bottom and starts to inundate or swallow up the three planetary systems. Here it's mentioned that when it does swallow up the three planetary systems, then it's mentioned that Garbhodakashaya Vishnu was alone, lying on his bedstead, the great Ananta, and although appeared to be in slumber in his internal potency, free from the action of external energy, his eyes were not completely closed. So the actions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead bewilders even the greatest living entities. That Nate Suragana Prabhavam Prabha Surya Aham Adir Hi Devanam Maharishinam Cha Sarvasaha. That in this verse Krishna says that I am the original, I am the origin of the demigods, Aham Adi Hi Devanam, and all the other living entities, beginning with the great sages, the demigods, they're unable to understand him. And if they're unable to understand him, what to speak of the avajananti ma'amudha, manushim tanumashitaha. They take it a step further, and although they're unable to understand Krishna, they presume Krishna to be an ordinary living being. Manushim tanumashitaha, that he has taken a form, that the Supreme Brahman has taken a form like all other Brahman, particles like us, and so therefore Krishna and the living entities are non-different. Such is the fallacious, ignorant and foolish argument of the Mayavadi philosophers. But that's not the case, because the Lord is always in his transcendental energy. The Lord is eternally enjoying transcendental bliss by his internal potency. Parasya shaktir vividhaiva shuyate sabhavaki jnana bala kriya cha, that natasya karyam karanam cha vidyate, the Lord has nothing to perform. And there is no one greater than him or equal to him. But although he has such great power, although he is able to perform activities, and although he has no work to perform, Parasya Shakti Vividaya Shiyate, that anything that needs to be performed is performed by his energy. He does not need to go out of his own way to do anything. Swabhavaki Jnana Bala Kriyacha, it's done by his Swabhavaki Jnana and Bala. Bala Kriya and Jnana Shaktis, as we have discussed previously. So they're performed by his particular energies. So while he enjoys his transcendental bliss, another point to be mentioned here is that the external potency is suspended during the time of the dissolution of the cosmic manifestation. So it's a very core fundamental principle of existence, that the material energy is permanent. It is eternal. Rather, sorry, it's not permanent. It is eternal, but its manifestation is temporary. It comes and goes out of existence. It comes into existence and then is unmanifest. Manifest and unmanifest. Vyakta, avyakta. That's the word used. Vyakta and then avyakta. That it is manifest and unmanifest. Whereas the internal potency is always manifest. It is eternal. It always exists and always manifested. But for the living entity stuck in material condition of life, the internal energy appears to be unmanifest, and the material energy seems to be manifest. So that's the confusion that covers the living entity, thinking that they themselves are the body, that he and she is the body, not the soul, and that the body is all in all, aham mameti, that I am this body, and mameti, anything in relationship to this body is mine, the false proprietorship. So these two things, that the false identity, ahankar, and the false proprietorship, these two things cause living entity to continually suffer in material existence, birth after birth. And if you read in Isopanishad, then Prabhupada explains how the mentality of the living entity of trying to enjoy the body and simply trying to feed the stomach, just like animals, for them, although they desire to enjoy material pleasures and they think that that's all there is to life, material nature still baffles their attempts to enjoy. So despite their decrying the need for self-realization, they still suffer in material existence, although they claim that such struggle is the goal of life. So that is the nature of foolish living entities, that although they are suffering in material existence, they're still very much stuck in thinking that ahara nidra bhayamaitanam cha samanametat pashabi naranam, that the living entities who are simply absorbed in eating, sleeping and mating and defending, they are lower than the animals. Samanametat pashabi naranam. This verse mentions that they are no different from two-legged animals. But in another place in Bhagavatam, it's mentioned that you're no better than animals. You're actually lesser than animals. Why? Because the animals, their lower intelligence has caused them to take such a body, and they're simply following the laws of material nature. Whereas the living entity in the form of a human being, they're given intelligence to be able to overcome material existence. But despite such opportunity, despite such facility, if one does not use it and misuses it, which is even worse. Not using is one thing, but to misuse it, then one falls down into material existence even more deeply and entangled even more strongly. In the next verse it's mentioned, just like strength of fire within fuel wood, the Lord remained within the water of dissolution. So fire within fuel wood, it remains unmanifest until you spark, provide the original spark, or if you go by the example of the Vedic literature, when you have the top wood and the bottom wood, and then you have the middle wood, and you rub them all together, then you can produce fire. And it is mentioned that this fire is actually unmanifest within wood. It's present within the wood, but it's just not manifest. It hasn't come into a full existence. So when you initiate the whole fire or chant the mantra, then the fire comes into existence. So similarly, the living entities are all merged in their subtle body within the body of the Lord, just like fire within firewood, fuel wood rather. And he lay in the self-invigorated energy called Kala. And Prabhupada is saying here that Kala is the avidya shakti or the material potency. So what is it that's submerged? What's submerged is the gross elements. Bhumir apo nalo vayu, Bhumir apo nalo vayu and kam. That's earth, water, fire, air and ether. These have been submerged, or in other words, they have become dissolved or disintegrated, or once again returned to their original separate manifestation, or how to say, their original state, not their combined state, but their separated state. Whereas the subtle body, that ahankara ityamen vinna pakitiras ahankaram, in the ego, intelligence and the mind, they are all the subtle body, and they remain to engage the living entity within the material world. But being in such subtle body, they are laying to rest within the body of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And Prabhupada explains here that in the dissolution, this gross body becomes unmanifest, but the subtle bodies existed just like water of the material creation. Thus, the material energy was not completely wound up, as is the case in the full dissolution of the material world. In the next verse, it's mentioned that by the agitation of Kala Shakti, the living entities then came out of the Lord's body. So we can understand here that the living entities always remain individual. They always remain as parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord and never merge into the Supreme Lord. Now here it's mentioned that the symptom of the influence of the Kala Shakti is that one has to work in the material world for fruitive results. As we can see, there's not even a moment that one cannot work, Krishna says. No one can remain idle even for a moment. So by this Kala Shakti, that is what's pushing the living entity in the material world. Once Gokuleshwar Prabhu was giving an example, and he was saying that after being asked a question, because we hear often that one will receive one's happiness and distress or karma, one will receive the results of his or her karma in due course of time. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So if your happiness and distress is fixed, that is, whatever you perform in life, if the Kala Shakti provides, he said it's like the Kala Shakti gives at that time. If at this particular time you're destined to get happiness, although you may be in a very difficult position, you'll get happiness. If you're destined to get distress, although you're in a happy situation, you'll get distress. But it may appear that the situation may be different. The situation may be different, but the reaction will come. He was explaining that, say for example, you're meant to leave your body at a particular time or experience distress at a particular time. Kala Shakti will chase after you. That reaction will chase after you so that you'll get it. Like for example, if someone, somehow or other, you're destined to die in a certain way, or destined to die at a certain time, how you die is the detail. That's dependent on your activities in this material world at this particular point in time. You may die from a heart attack. You may die from being hit by a car. But you're meant to die at that point in time. Kala Shakti delivers. Yeah, that's the word. Kala Shakti delivers on a golden plate your reaction. You have to take it at that point in time. That's why it's mentioned that Narad Muni tells Vyasadeva that an intelligent person is not absorbed in going up and down to the higher planetary system, to the lower planetary system, trying to find happiness. Because just as distress comes of its own accord, so does happiness. But the living entity is being conditioned to thinking that they are the doer. They are thinking, I am in control. I am the body. I am the proprietor. By my actions, happiness comes. By my actions, distress will be destroyed. But we see that in material existence, that's not the case. That's not what happens. So what is that keeps pushing living entities to go on? It's this Kala Shakti. Because you think about it for a second, under the premise of thinking oneself the controller and the enjoyer, one still suffers in material existence. So naturally one will then question, why am I suffering if I'm the enjoyer and the controller? But actually Maya is so powerful that she covers the living entity and drags them down. So as soon as the living entity comes up or suddenly comes to some sort of epiphany, some sort of realization that, why am I suffering in this world? I'm meant to be the enjoyer, and doesn't take steps forward in self-realization, then what's the next best thing Maya does? The grass is greener on the other side. She tempts the living entity, saying that, just see, that person over there. Although you and him or her may have the same facilities to enjoy, they're enjoying a bit better because they're doing it a bit differently to you. So you should follow in their footsteps. And what's happening on their side? Maya is tempting them by pointing at you. Just see, that person, enjoying, no suffering. You should also become like them. So in this way, Maya, through the Kala Shakti, forces the living entity to work. And having no knowledge, having no greater knowledge, you're simply stuck in material existence, hoping to get something better. This is the Avidya Shakti. Fruitive workers are described in Bhagavad Gita as mudas or foolish. Such foolish living entities are very enthusiastic to work for some temporary benefit within perpetual bondage. So Prabhupada gives the example of the ass. The ass works so hard for a little bit of grass, which is available everywhere. And that analogy is given for the living entity, that they work so hard for some so-called happiness when happiness is already available within. It is already available within. But because of material existence, because of Maya, Prabhupada says Maya. Maya means that which is not. Maya. That which is not. A mirage or an illusion. So the whole idea of Maya is to make one think that there's happiness, but there's no happiness. Illusion. So one thinks himself very clever throughout his life if he's able to leave behind him a great asset of wealth for his children. So we can see this in the example of Ajamil. That Ajamil, just to achieve some temporary benefit, which was to enjoy with his prostitute partner, not even wife, partner, and to beget children, to maintain such a sinful activity, sinful family, he took the risk of performing all types of sinful work. He was a Brahmana who was performing all pious activities. He had a Brahmani wife. He was under the guidance of a proper family. He had everything. But then, having come in contact with material energy again and becoming bewildered, then he took up all types of sinful activities such as killing, stealing, so on and so forth, just to maintain such sinful desires, sinful actions. But we can see in that example that although the mind was or mentality was polluted by material sins, and the impetus for activity was there, the holy name of the Lord was able to, let's put it the other way, he was able to take advantage of chanting, although unintentionally, the holy name of the Lord in delivering himself. So Haridas Thakur, he in a conversation with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in anxiety tells Haridas Thakur that how will all the living entities in this material world be liberated? Because Mahaprabhu saw the nature, or Mahaprabhu knew the mentality of the living entities. That here they are wandering in the forest of material enjoyment. Or rather, let's put the example, they're wandering in the forest or the desert of material happiness, seeking happiness, like a deer trying to run after a mirage. But such happiness doesn't exist. You know, the example given is that of Tatala Seikatu Sari Bindu Sama. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he mentions this. Was it Tulsidas? This one? That the enjoyment in the material world is like a drop of water in the desert. Vidyapati. So there it's mentioned that this so-called Sutamita Ramani Samaje, that this so-called happiness of family life, of material existence, is no better than a drop of water in the desert. And my Guru Maharaj gives and further elaborates on these examples. Say you're wandering in the desert for so many days, and your throat's dry. You know, if you go to the beach, or if you go to the beach and you walk along when it's a very windy day, then the sand automatically causes you to become very dry throat. You feel very dry because of such a situation there. But luckily when the water from the ocean comes, it nullifies it, so it's fine. But in the desert, such a situation is there. It's hot, it's very dry, and you don't have an opportunity for any type of moisture. So naturally the throat becomes very dry. And if you're wandering from here to there with dry throat, dehydrated, then naturally you'll be in a very bewildered state of consciousness, disoriented. And such a disoriented situation, you'll be looking at, from a distance, due to the heat waves, you'll start to see water, a mirage. And so you'll start running after it. And after a period of time, you'll lose all your energy and you're unable to continue any further. But say in that situation, suddenly a helicopter comes. And in that helicopter, there's a person that jumps down from that rope ladder and comes forward to you with a bottle, a Mount Franklin or Coles water bottle, and comes down and gives you that water and asks you to open out your mouth and show your tongue, and that he will give water. And that person opens the cap, and out from the bottle of water comes one drop, and that one drop hits the tongue. Would you be satisfied? No. But that's material existence. That is so-called happiness. So this is what Mahaprabhu knew. Mahaprabhu saw the living entities trying to enjoy. So he asked Haridas Thakur. And Haridas Thakur told the Lord, "My Lord, please do not be anxious. Please do not feel despair in this way. For you have already delivered the whole world. Simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, what to speak of living entities, or moving entities, even non-moving living entities, they are liberated simply by this loud chanting of this Hare Krishna Mahamantra." So, Srila Haridas Thakur, his whole life was dedicated to teaching the whole world the Sankirtan movement, that Param Vijayata Shri Krishna Sankirtana. Therefore, he was designated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Namacharya. Yesterday, we were hearing from Ishwareshwar Prabhu about how there were the different sampradayas, or apasampradayas, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had defeated. And one of them was known as the Jati Gosais, or the caste Goswamis. And their philosophy is that unless you're born within this family, you're not considered to be eligible to attain the spiritual kingdom. Because they extend this whole analogy of how one living entity becomes purified, then takes birth in Bhauma Vrindavan, performs the pastimes under the guidance of devotees, the Nitya Siddhas, when Krishna appears, and then they get liberated and go to the supreme spiritual abode, Goloka Vrindavan. So their misconception is that first you have to be born in our hereditary lineage, our club, so then you can go back to home, back to Godhead. And once Prabhupada's disciples in the early days, they had visited Vrindavan, and they visited this temple, and the caste Goswami there told them that, it's great that you're all doing these activities, but in the future, when you take birth in the Goswami family, that's when you'll be able to achieve real Krishna Bhakti, Krishna Prem. That's when you'll attain Golok Vrindavan. And so the disciples went and told Prabhupada this, being bewildered. And Prabhupada was on fire. He told them, you go back and tell him that hopefully in the future that he'll take birth in ISKCON, and that's how he'll go home back to Godhead. So Prabhupada was very much against it. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was against it. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was also against it. Because it's just a simply material conception of life that's creeping into spiritual understanding. So we can see this this principle of going beyond the caste manifest in how Mahaprabhu gave Haridas Thakur the title of Namacharya. And you'll see throughout Chaitanya Charitamrita, when you read about the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that Haridas Thakur's humility, because we know that Lord Brahma, after the Brahma Vimohana Leela, that he had become bewildered, of course, by the Lord's internal potency, but by the Lord's will, because he is our Sampradaya Acharya, and that he is beyond illusion, being the Guru of our Sampradaya. But the Lord wanted to show, or wanted to exhibit his pastimes. So therefore, Brahma came under illusion, and Lord Krishna then pulled him out again, just as he did with Arjuna. But Lord Brahma, feeling very bad, feeling very, very repentant, feeling very remorseful for having doubted and tested the Lord's potency, he then offered so many prayers. And Krishna, at that point in time, he was in the bhava of, or his original mood of a cowherd boy, and he wanted to enjoy that rasa, how to say, he wanted to enjoy that mood of a cowherd boy. He did not want to be disturbed by Aishwarya Bhava, that awe and reverence and worship that comes from those particular devotees. So it's mentioned that Lord Krishna simply looked at Lord Brahma. He didn't smile, he didn't do anything. And the Acharyas mentioned that what went through Lord Krishna's head or mind was that, why is this four-headed Brahma offering and paying obeisances to me? I'm just a simple cowherd boy. What does he have to do with me? But Lord Brahma felt in his heart that although the Lord forgave him, he still felt very repentant. So then he went to Antardvip. And there in Antardvip he performed great austerities, chanting the Gauranga mantra. And performing austerities and chanting the Gauranga mantra, he got the darshan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And having the darshan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he begged the Lord that when you appear next, I wish to always remain humble. Please always arrange it so that I will always remain humble and remember my position, and that somehow or other I will be able to once again engage in your pastimes. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu blessed him that yes, you will attain my pastimes and you will always remain humble. And it is this with this benediction that that Lord Brahma descended or incarnated as Haridas Thakur. And as Haridas Thakur, we can see that he was born in a Muslim family. He was born in a so-called degraded family that was beyond the Vedic literature or the Vedic culture. But when we see Advaita Acharya glorified and elevated Haridas Thakur to the position of that higher than the Brahmanas when he offered the Shraddha plate to Haridas Thakur. You see, when they performed this particular ritual or sacrifice or this activity of the Shraddha, offering of this particular oblations to the forefathers, the first ones to eat are the Brahmanas. The first ones to eat or served are the topmost or the top class Brahmanas. And Haridas Thakur was given that plate. And Haridas Thakur obviously objected. How can you give this plate to me? There's so many wonderful Vaishnavas here, Brahmanas. How is it that I am getting this plate? I am just simply a fallen Mlecha, Yavana, and I come from a bad background. So why are you giving me this? And Advaita Acharya clarifies and says, actually you're chanting the holy name. In fact, you are the Namacharya, and simply by your chanting the whole world is being delivered. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also reflects this, that you are the Namacharya. After hearing from Haridas Thakur about the glories of the holy name and how he pacifies the Lord simply by chanting the holy names very loudly, all living entities will be delivered, then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu glorifies him and tells him, you are therefore known as the Namacharya. So, even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught by example that this caste system or this idea of birth being the main qualification for devotional service is a fallacious idea or a foolish idea, something that is just manufactured for one's own material benefit. In another place, Srila Haridas Thakur, we can see that when he was visited by the prostitutes and he was visited by Maya Devi herself, we can see this principle here, that this Kala Shakti or Avidya Shakti, when when living entities come under the control, they become bewildered and they desire to enjoy their senses. But we can see from the example of Haridas Thakur how one can become protected, or one can defend against the onslaught of material energy. That Haridas Thakur, although he does not need to defend, mind you, Haridas Thakur is on a liberated platform, so Maya doesn't affect him. In fact, he uses Maya for Krishna's service. But to show an example to others that although despite the Lakshahira, that the prostitute appeared before Haridas Thakur, and despite Maya Devi herself appearing before Haridas Thakur, he liberated both personalities. He gave them both the Hare Krishna mantra. And that is the nature of the Namacharya, that the Namacharya gives or teaches by example the glories of the holy name, by example and by teaching it to others. Srila Sanatana Goswami, when he appeared in, or rather he traveled to Puri to meet Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there at that time, I believe it was Sanatana Goswami, or was it Rupa Goswami, that when Mahaprabhu appeared there, Mahaprabhu glorified one of these transcendental brothers with Haridas Thakur there as the audience. And Haridas Thakur, after Mahaprabhu left, Haridas Thakur glorified. Was it Rupa Goswami or Sanatana Goswami that said? Sanatana Goswami. And Sanatana Goswami then, with full humility, told Srila Haridas Thakur that actually there are many people who are very good at preaching, but their personal activities or their achar, their own, the way they carry themselves and their actions don't meet or match. One may be very good in one's own personal performance of sadhana, but their preaching or their prachar is not very good. But we see that both are manifested perfectly within you. That you are the Namacharya, presenting both achar and prachar perfectly. That is, by one's own personal sadhana and by preaching. Both are the same. That whatever he preaches, he follows. And whatever he follows, he preaches. So this is the nature of Srila Haridas Thakur. Of course, there's a lot to speak about of Srila Haridas Thakur. One more pastime that sort of highlights the relationship Haridas Thakur had with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. During the Mahaprakash Lila, that's when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu manifested his opulence, sitting on the Singhasan for 72 hours, I believe. 72 hours? 3 days. 72 hours. There it's mentioned that he would call up each and every one of the devotees and he would give them a benediction. So at this particular point in time, he called Haridas Thakur and he told Haridas Thakur, do you remember that time where you were beaten in those marketplaces? That the Pathan or the leader at that particular place had caught you and had, out of disgust and out of his own ego, he was thinking, here is a Muslim, a person born from the Muslim community, but now he is chanting like a madman this Hindu culture. What's wrong with him? And he gave Haridas Thakur an ultimatum that you should not chant all of these things. You should come back and follow the Quran and become a proper Muslim. And Haridas Thakur, being Haridas Thakur, continued chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. And this leader or this king, being very envious, then ordered that Srila Haridas Thakur be beaten in 21 marketplaces. And although being beaten in so many different places and Haridas Thakur chanting the whole time, there was not even a single marking on his body. And he wasn't dying, because the whole point of being beaten in such a way is that to teach others by example what happens if you don't follow the certain rulership of that particular place. And second, to mete out punishment that Haridas Thakur had to get from such a cruel, ignorant ruler. But despite all of this, the people pulling Haridas Thakur were completely astonished. Neither is he passing away, and neither is he experiencing pain. Something's not right. And they were getting very much anxious and scared, because if they went back with Haridas Thakur to the ruler, then they would be punished because the ruler would be thinking these guys such lazy people haven't done their duty properly. So then what did they do? They immediately bound up Haridas Thakur and threw him into the water, into a river, hoping that would rid him. In fact, he gives them the idea. Feeling compassionate upon them, he gives them the idea. You know what you do? You just throw me into the river and you explain to the king what happened, to the ruler at that time. And Haridas Thakur goes into the river, washes up on the other side of the shore, chants Hare Krishna and continues going on his pilgrimage. So Mahaprabhu tells Haridas Thakur, do you remember that situation? And Mahaprabhu shows his back to Srila Haridas Thakur. And on the back of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are the whip marks that were supposed to be met out to Haridas Thakur. And Haridas Thakur faints out of great pain. But the pain he experienced was of an ecstatic nature, because he's feeling that he is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who protected me. But how is it that he felt or received such punishment on my behalf? So you can understand the nature of the relationship with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Haridas Thakur, that Mahaprabhu, rather let's put it the other way, Srila Haridas Thakur was a very intimate associate of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That he invited, Mahaprabhu invited that Haridas Thakur come and stay in Puri with him until the end of his advent. He arranged a specific place for Haridas Thakur to stay. He visited Haridas Thakur every single day. And when Haridas Thakur left his body, Mahaprabhu made sure, personally made sure, all the rites and rituals were done. So that is the nature of Srila Haridas Thakur, and how dear he was to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In fact, his humility used to break Mahaprabhu's heart. So I believe also that Haridas Thakur's humility, Haridas Thakur's taught the world humility, right? There are 3 different personalities, and each one of them taught the holy name, the glories of the holy name. Sanatana Goswami taught the humility. And what's the third one? Damodar Pandit taught neutrality. Okay. So yes, the glories of the holy name. But even though we can still see the epitome of humility within Srila Haridas Thakur. Okay, so I'll end here. We're already over time. Thank you very much for listening. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nithai Gaur Premanande.